Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Runaway Train Sports Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at Purdue's third game of the season, Air Force, as well as some general thoughts on the basketball tournament and the Minute Mackey entering and making the field. So let's go ahead and get started taking a look at Purdue's Week 3 game against Air Force. They'll be coming off of, obviously, their Week 2 game against Memphis, which could be a hard-fought game. Win or lose, that will definitely be a hard-fought game. You can listen to my preview or read my preview over at boilerinTexas.com or where your favorite podcast is released. So taking a look at Air Force, Purdue welcomes the Service Academy to West Lafayette, or actually, they haven't. Purdue is going to be playing Air Force for the first time in program history. This is only the third time that Purdue has played a Service Academy and will be the first since 1944. Their history with Service Academies involve a pair of games against Navy, one in 1944 where Navy beat Purdue 32-0. And once again, Navy beating them 17-13 in 1926. So obviously it has been quite a long time since Purdue has played a Service Academy, and I think this is going to be an interesting matchup, to say the least. So looking at Air Force, like Memphis, they're coming off of one of their best seasons in recent history. They finished 11-2, with their only losses coming to Navy on the road, as well as Boise State on the road. They lost their game at Navy 34-25 and lost their game at Boise State 30-19. Either way, 11-2, still a very successful season. Unfortunately, the losses did keep them from any major team honors last year. The loss to Navy kept the Commander-in-Chief's trophy, or the trophy that rotates around the best Service Academy, out of their hands, as well as their loss to Boise State prevented them from reaching the Mountain West title game. They are still seeking, as successful as some of the sort of service academies have been. Air Force in particular is still searching for their first trip to the Mountain West title game, and they'll certainly be looking to make that run this year. To finish their season, they did beat Washington State in the Cactus Bowl 31-21, and they've finished strong, as if I remember correctly, their loss to Boise State was early in the season, and Navy was mid-season, I think, as well. So they definitely finished the season strong and are looking to carry over a lot of that momentum into 2020. We will have to see how that goes. Looking at their schedule for this year, quite a bit different. Normally, Navy likes to schedule a week 2 bye, and for whatever reason, this year they do not do that. They begin the season hosting Duquesne as a nice little warm-up piece. They then host Boise State in week 2, and I'm sure they will be amped up to take revenge on the Broncos after last season, as well as begin their run for the Mountain West title game. They then travel to Purdue. We will cover that. And then they'll travel to Fresno State, host Navy, travel to San Jose State, host Hawaii, travel to Wyoming, then Army, host Colorado State, and then New Mexico, and then finish the season at Utah State. So, looking at their schedule, it's a decent schedule. They have games on the road at Purdue as well as their typical games against Army and Navy. They get Navy at home as well, so after they have the chance to avenge their 2 losses last year on the road, welcoming those teams to their own stadium. So let's go ahead and start looking at some individual pieces for this matchup. We'll begin by taking a look at the Air Force Offense. And like most service academies, I hope you are ready for some running the ball action. as they too employ the triple option. And I hope you enjoy quick games because the clock will definitely be running when Air Force has the ball. Like I said, the other service academies also definitely employ the running the ball strategy. The three service academies as a whole led the nation in rushing offense last season, with Navy coming in first, Air Force second, and Army third in the nation in rushing. And there's no reason that this year should be any different. I would say the one thing about Air Force that is slightly different than, say, Army or Navy is that they do also tend to throw the ball some, not a lot, but some. Last season, they did finish 125th in the nation in passing yards per game, but just about 123 yards per game. And most of those obviously coming from more misdirection timing plays, taking shots when they feel that the defense is taking a nap. So Purdue will definitely have to stay fundamentally sound and play some very solid football in order to not get beat over the top. Taking a look at a couple of big names to keep an eye out on the Falcons offense, you have Caden Rimsberg, a running back, returns. He was their top rusher in 2019. He finished with just over 1,000 yards with 1,050 yards and 8 touchdowns. Expect to see a heavy dose of him coming out of the backfield for a running option. Next, you have the orchestrator of everything, Donald Hammond III. He returns as a senior to lead the option one more time. In 2019, he finished with 553 yards on the ground and 12 touchdowns. And he actually did finish with just over 1,300 yards and 13 touchdowns through the air against just 6 interceptions. So you can fully expect whoever is going to be lining up under center for a triple option team is going to know what they're doing, and they're going to have the necessary mindset to do so, because leading the option and orchestrating that offense can be very taxing, and you have to expect that they're going to play very fundamental, very straightforward football, and Purdue is going to have to do the same. Taking a look at receiver, Air Force actually only lists 8 receivers on their 2019 roster, and I'm unsure. I haven't been able to find a solid number on this year. And comparing that to Purdue, which feels like they have about 20 receivers on the roster, it is quite jarring to see teams like the service academies and Air Force that just don't pass the ball. So looking at their transition from 2019 to 2020, Air Force does lose their 2 biggest threats at receiver in Gerard Saunders and Ben Waters. Between them, between 20 and 30 receptions and between 650 and 750 yards apiece, respectively. And then they each finished with 7 touchdowns. Both of them, graduation will be big losses for the Falcons. They actually accounted for 52 of Air Force's 68 completed passes last season. So there would definitely be breaking in some new receivers, as the entire combined rest of the receiving core actually only had a combined 4 receptions last season. So there'll definitely be some new faces to the downfield threats whenever they do take those shots, and Purdue will have to do well to scout ahead and not let them behind them. So as I mentioned, the Air Force offense is designed to take advantage of defensive mistakes, and the option has always been deemed the great equalizer in college football. And the service academies show that very well, as they've all individually found success recently and look to continue to do so going into the future. They will run the ball, they will control the clock, and they will try to make fewer mistakes than the opposing team. And if Purdue is going to have success with stopping the Air Force offense, this new defense will have to stay fundamentally sound and focus less on making one big play and focus more on making every simple play. And if they can make every simple play and stay sound in their assignments, I think Purdue will have success against this team. The problem is with such a young core as well as a new defense, I think this has the opportunity to see some issues, and it will just have to see how the first couple of games of the season affect how they go forward into this game. Memphis will be a much different defense, and so switching from facing an air raid offense that likes to score points in Memphis to a control the ball, run the clock, and just make no mistakes team in Air Force will be interesting to see. Moving now to the other side of the ball, take a look at the Air Force defense. Air Force, like Purdue will hopefully do next year, is they employ a 3-4 defense, and they do have a bit of immediate attrition as they do lose their top pass rusher from 2019. Last season, they ranked 7th in rush defense, holding teams to just over 100 yards per game. And they were fairly mediocre in the passing game. Looking at rankings, at least in ranking statistics, they finished ranked 62 in the country, allowing about 230 yards per game. So that is a good sign for a Purdue offense, which last year had trouble running the ball and really had to focus on throwing the ball. And while I do believe that Purdue will find more balance this year in the running game, they will definitely still be a pass-heavy offense. So looking at a couple of the position groups for Air Force, linebacking will definitely be very important in any defense, but probably more so in a 3-4 than any other. Leading the interior of the defense for Air Force will be DeMonte Meeks, who had a great 2019, finishing with just under 100 tackles with 98, 4 sacks, and 4 QB hits. Meeks will also be joined in the linebacking core by a former top recruit in T.D. Blackman. That'll be another name to keep an eye on. Let's see. Moving on to the secondary. One big name they have is Milton Bug III, who finished 2019 with 3 interceptions, 7 pass breakups, as well as 49 tackles. They will be breaking in a handful of other new defensive backs this year, so getting them earlier in the season may be a blessing in disguise with a team in Purdue that is definitely going to be throwing the ball. So having to break in a handful of new backs will be a plus towards Purdue. Yeah, excuse me. Let's see. So even with the difference in Air Force's rushing defense and passing defense from last year, this is still going to definitely be one of the better defenses Purdue will face in 2020. Air Force gave up less than 20 points per game in 2019. And even with their losses and their leading pass rusher, as well as a handful of guys in the secondary, there's no reason to believe that their defense will really take a step back. The service academies, as I mentioned in the offense section, thrive on playing fundamentally sound and not making mistakes. And so you can believe that they will take the same mindset into the defensive side of the ball and will stay on their assignments, and Purdue will have to work hard to make those big plays and get those chunk yards, and they're definitely going to have to be able to play sound offense and really limit turnovers. If Purdue turns the ball over a lot, I think this could be a real issue, especially when you look at how Air Force likes to control the ball on offense. If Purdue gives them extra possessions, Purdue just may not have that many possessions to make up. So that could be a very important side of the ball. Let's see. Moving on to looking at special teams, Air Force does lose their punter and kicker from last season. Jake Kronk. I'm probably butchering that, so I apologize. It was the big man in charge for field goals. He finished last season perfect on 13 and 13 with actually a long of 57. So they'll be breaking in a pair of new kickers, both place kicking and punting. Looking at the return game, Air Force doesn't really threaten much when returning punts or kickoffs, as they're pretty okay and confident in playing the field position game, as they average just 1.2 yards in punt returns and less than 20 yards per kick return. So they're very much more comfortable playing the field position possession game in an attempt to even up the talent gap, as well as just not making any mistakes. So looking at this game as a whole, I think that it could be one of the trickier non-conference games. Not that there are any easy non-conference games on the schedule, but looking at it as a whole of going from week 2 to week 3, having to play a high-powered offense in Memphis, to immediately turning around and playing a triple option team in Air Force will be tough. And in a young core Purdue defense, I think it could cause a lot of issues. This should be on a one plus side. This should be one of those games where Purdue should have the physical advantage, just because of the recruiting limitations that the service academies do have. But that being said, like I mentioned, having to face the option after you rarely see it can be tricky, and the Purdue coaching staff is going to have a tricky time doing that and getting them prepared and immediately switched from Memphis off to this, same formation, same basic movement. Gonna have to stay fundamentally sound style of offense and Air Force. And Purdue is going to have to get them off the field on the defensive side, because I don't think Air Force is going to have any issues running off a 15 plus 10 minute plus drive, just running the ball if Purdue can't get stops, which is probably going to include a lot of fourth down conversions, because when you're running the triple option, the old adage of Big Ten football, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, you're getting a first down every 4 plays. So Purdue is going to have to get them off the field and is really going to have to limit their opportunities to score if they're going to have enough possessions to potentially make up for any mistakes or just score in general. Looking at the game outlook on the other side of the ball, as the case will be all season, Purdue has a couple of guys lining up on the outside by the names of Rondell Moore and David Bell. These guys are always going to give Purdue a chance and should have no trouble taking advantage, using their speed and skill over the new, less experienced Air Force secondary. And I feel like I've said this every episode, but until we hear what's happening with it, whoever ends up lining up under center for Purdue, they just need to get the ball into the receiver's hands and not make any mistakes. And Purdue should be able to move the ball fairly confidently on offense. I think the big question surrounding the offense will be whether or not they'll be able to generate anything in the run game. I think with another year of experience on the offensive line, as well as in the backfield, I think Purdue should be able to generate more in the run game this season. Whether or not they can do it in this game, I think that will be more telling. I think they just need to be average to moderate in success level in this game and running the ball. And if they can do that, I think we'll be sitting pretty on the offensive side of the ball. So this should definitely be a pretty intriguing game to see, especially immediately coming off of their Week 2 game against Memphis. I think it'll be a fun one, and I really hope that we get the opportunity to see it. Once again, not going to go into score predictions here. You'll have to head over to boilerinTexas.com to check out my preview for the Air Force game. But I do want to hear what you think will happen when Air Force comes to West Lafayette and when Purdue gets to line up against the triple option for the first time in a long while. So that will wrap up our look at Air Force and their trip to Ross-Ade. I now, in the next section, want to just give a brief talk about the basketball tournament as it is slated to begin this weekend, and we will take a look at this weekend's lineup for the men at Mackey. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the Runaway Train Sports Podcast. We're now going to be taking a look at the 2020 edition of the basketball tournament, or TBT, which tips off on July 4th and will run all the way through the next 10 days and will conclude on July 14th with the championship game and all the games being played in Columbus, Ohio. Purdue gets their first alumni team into the basketball tournament ever, and I, for one, could not be more excited. Not only have I wanted to see a Purdue team play in this tournament, I have wanted to see live sports so much that I'm willing to take anything I can get at this point. So the game, like I mentioned, the tournament kicks off this Saturday, July 4th, with a handful of games coming to ESPN and ESPN2. Let's see, taking a look at the schedule, a couple of games to watch out for, besides just watching all of them on Saturday. There's the House of Pain, an Illinois alumni team, so you see the Big Ten represented a little bit there. Not much else going on Saturday in terms of Big Ten related things. Moving on to Sunday, this is where we see the Men at Mackey come into play. They will take on a team, Heartfire, at 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN2. So keep your get your DVR ready, get your popcorn ready, get your adult beverage of choice ready, and get ready to watch a handful of Purdue alumni play basketball in a live setting once again. So, like I mentioned, 7 p.m. on ESPN2. Should they win that game, their next game will come July 7th on Tuesday. They'll play if they beat Heartfire on Sunday, they'll play one of the favorites, Boeheim's Army, a Syracuse alumni team, which has always been historically pretty solid in these and should provide a pretty tough test for the team. And then from there, if they should win that game, let's see, taking a look ahead, it looks like the schedule will probably be set from there. So we have at least one game of live Purdue related basketball to watch, and hopefully they're able to win their first game and probably get the center stage as they take on the Syracuse alumni team on Tuesday on the mothership of ESPN. I think that this team, the COVID situation definitely plays a role in how my feelings about this has changed over time. In the beginning, there was a handful of names that I was really excited to see on the roster, but because of travel restrictions and scheduling changes, a lot of guys had to drop out and be replaced with. I'm not doubting good players, but guys who at least I wasn't as interested in seeing or haven't heard their names. That could again just be 100% on me, but we'll just have to see. Some big names that I'm excited to see again. Isaac Haas, I think, will be a fun one to see, just because that is still a dump truck of a man, and I think that we'll be able to see a lot of the same dominant play that we saw while he was on Purdue. Some big losses that I was disappointed to see are some of the more recent ones. PJ Thompson, Ryan Klein, and Grady Eifert were not able to make a run at it due to scheduling changes and the format. So they unfortunately had to drop out, which I'm really gutted about, because I think this is a perfect time for tournament for a guy like Grady Eifert and PJ Thompson to thrive in. Another fun name that you haven't heard in a while, and they were able to replace they were able to add old Johnny Hill from, what was it? He was a graduate transfer in 15 and 16. Is that right? So I think that'll be a fun one to see him play again in the gold and black. Let's see. Scrolling down through the roster here. There's also Justin Denman. He has played in the tournament before and is an NBA G League MVP in the past, so I think he'll be a fun name to watch, even if he isn't directly tied to Purdue. Well, he is tied to Purdue in a very fun way, at least on the Purdue side, as the Boilermakers actually ended his collegiate career in the 2019 NCAA tournament when he played for Washington. So I think he'll be a fun one to add to the roster, and he's currently spending some time bouncing around between the different leagues, trying to do the best he can. And then there's also Ethan Stair, who is coming from Mercer. He looks to be the replacement for Ryan Klein type, who shot 40% from three, finished with almost 15 points a game at Mercer. So it's unfortunate that we don't get to see Grady, Ryan, or PJ, but they had a couple of guys who look to be able to step in and provide some worth. I think the biggest loss is just that these guys aren't directly Purdue guys, so I think that kind of makes it a little less fun. But I'm not going to go into too much detail just because there's not a whole lot to say at this point. The teams have currently arrived in Ohio and have been being continuously monitored and tested for coronavirus. So from what it sounds like guys are starting to be cleared as well to be able to return and start preparing for the start of the tournament this weekend. I look forward to seeing, as I said plenty, and I'm sure I'm not alone, I'm looking forward to seeing live basketball on TV again, and I think this could be a lot of fun. And I hope that the Minute Mackey get some success and are able to make it a couple of rounds in and be able to maybe make a run. As well as, if you haven't checked them out on their social media, they're Men at Mackey. They just released the uniforms they're going to be wearing, and I should say that they are hot fire, and I hope that Purdue is able to get something similar for their collegiate games, because man, those things were nice. They took the old Rick Mount style script with Mackey across the chest. It looks really good, you guys. So if you haven't seen that, go check them out on their social medias. I know they're Purdue TBT on Instagram and Twitter. Go give them a follow. Go show your support. Tell them Boiler in Texas sent you. And join me in watching and supporting them through the TV as well as through social media. And hopefully we can will them to a little bit of success, and we can see some Purdue basketball get played again. But that's going to wrap it up here for episode 3 of the Runaway Train Sports Podcast. I thank you for joining me. If you've made it this far, you are the real MVP. And look forward to next week's episode, as I know we will take a look at Purdue's matchup against Boston College, as well as the potential other topics. So once again, thank you. And as always, Boiler up, hammer down, hail Purdue.